I raised my glass to toast my son at his $100,000 wedding, fully aware he had just spiked my drink. But what made 300 guests freeze was not my fall. It was the sentence he accidentally spoke into the microphone before he collapsed. The only person who could save me was the mystery photographer, the one person my son feared most. Yet he had no idea who she really was. My name is Marianne Caldwell. I am 58 years old, a widow, and the CEO of the Caldwell Meridian Group. I have spent 3 decades building a reputation for assessing catastrophic risk in the corporate world. Tonight, however, I walked into the grand ballroom of the Vesper Line in Savannah, not as a shark, but as a mother. Or so they thought. The wedding was a $100,000 spectacle. The air smelled of imported lilies and old money. 300 guests filled the room. I saw the partners from the financial district, the senior litigators, and the wealthy donors who kept the symphony afloat. They held their crystal flutes and smiled with polite precision. But their eyes were cold. They were human calculators. I could feel them scanning the room, pricing the silk of my dress, estimating the carats on my wrist, and waiting to see if the widow Caldwell would finally crack under the pressure of letting her only son go. It was suffocating. My son, Evan Caldwell, stood near the head table. At 32, he was the picture of success. His tuxedo was bespoke, fitting his broad shoulders perfectly. He held the hand of his bride, Genevieve Harrow, who looked like a porcelain doll in her designer lace. To the room, he was the groom of the year. To me, he was a boy trying too hard to hide his fear. I watched his hand as he reached for his water glass. There was a tremor. It was slight, barely a vibration, but I saw it. His knuckles were white. He was terrified. I took my seat at the mother of the groom's table. The linen was stark white. Directly in front of me sat 2 champagne flutes. They were placed side by side, distinct from the other settings. They were too close together. It looked deliberate. It looked staged. I watched Evan from across the room. His eyes kept darting back to those 2 glasses. He would smile at a guest. Then his gaze would snap back to my table. It was a nervous tick. My instincts flared. This was not hospitality. This was a trap. Tessa Rowland, my best friend for 30 years, slid into the chair next to me. She adjusted her shawl and leaned in close. "Marianne, darling," she whispered, her voice thick with amusement. "You need to breathe. You look like you are marching into battle." I forced a stiff smile. "Just the nerves?" "Tessa." I lied. "It is a big night." I felt eyes on me. I turned my head slightly and saw a photographer moving through the crowd. This was not the lead photographer I had vetted. This was a young woman, dressed entirely in black, moving with a feline grace. Her name tag read, Hart. Riley Hart. She had her camera slung low at her hip. She was not taking photos of the cake or the flowers. She was looking right at me. Her gaze was intense, analytical, and completely devoid of the usual service industry deference. She snapped a picture of my table, her lens lingering on the 2 glasses, and then melted back into the shadows. Evan walked over to my table. He smelled of expensive cologne and scotch. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, but his lips were cold. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper so the guests nearby could not hear. "You just relax. Tonight, I am going to take care of everything." The pause in his sentence made the hair on my arms stand up. It sounded less like reassurance and more like a final verdict. Suddenly, the room went quiet. The master of ceremonies tapped his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please charge your glasses for the first toast." The voice boomed over the speakers. I watched Evan straighten up. As he pulled away from my table to return to his bride, his hand drifted down. His index finger brushed the rim of the glass on the right. It was a quick, subtle motion. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. He did not touch the other glass, just that one. A cold realization washed over me, sharper than the air conditioning. He had marked the target. My son was not here to celebrate me. He was here to remove me. My pulse hammered against my throat like a trapped bird. The room felt too hot, the air too thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roast beef. I needed to focus, but the edges of my vision were blurring. My phone vibrated against my thigh under the heavy linen tablecloth. I pulled it out, shielding the screen with my napkin. The light from the display was blinding in the dim ballroom. One new message. The sender ID read, Heart. The text consisted of 5 words in stark capital letters. Don't drink. He spiked it. I stared at the screen. The letters seemed to swim before my eyes. Heart. Riley. Heart. The photographer with the intense eyes. I did not know this woman. Why was she texting me? How did she have my personal number, Fear? Cold and sharp. Pierced through the confusion. This was not a wrong number. This was a scream in a silent room. I slowly lifted my head. My neck felt stiff, like rusted machinery. I looked for Evan. He stood across the dance floor, surrounded by the Harrow family. He was laughing at something his new father-in-law said, throwing his head back in a performance of joy. But the performance stopped at his eyes. His gaze did not move. It was locked on my table. He was not looking at me as his mother. He was looking at a variable in an equation. He was waiting for the solution to resolve. He was waiting for me to drink. A memory from 4 months ago flashed through my mind. We were in my office. Evan had been pacing, his hands deep in his pockets. "Mom," he had said, his voice dropping to that concerned register he used when he wanted something. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure. That the estate planning is airtight, I mean. If something happened to you unexpectedly." I had dismissed it then as anxiety. Now, looking at his unblinking stare, I realized it was research, and the company shares. He had continued that day, stopping by the window. "The market is volatile. Maybe it is time we think about selling Caldwell Meridian Group. You deserve to rest. Rest." The word echoed in my head. He did not want me to rest. He wanted me erased. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. 300 people filled this room. The most powerful people in Savannah. If I stood up now and screamed that my son was trying to poison me, they would not see a victim. They would see a spectacle. They would see Marianne Caldwell, the widow, cracking under the pressure, drunk and hysterical at her son's wedding. I would lose my credibility in seconds. Evan counted on that. He knew I valued dignity over safety. I felt a presence behind me. I did not turn. A shadow fell across the white tablecloth. Riley Hart moved past my chair. She did not stop. She did not look at my face. She moved with the fluid silence of a hunter. As she passed, her hand brushed the space between the floral centerpiece and the candle. Click. A tiny sound. A small black square clattered onto the linen. A memory card. She kept walking, disappearing into the crowd of tuxedos and gowns. The message was clear. I have proof. I looked down at the memory card, then back at the champagne flutes. This was real. Someone had seen him. The text was not a prank. It was a lifeline. But now I faced a terrifying problem. 2 glasses sat before me. They were identical crystal flutes. Both bubbled with expensive vintage champagne. Both caught the candlelight in the same golden hue. I did not know which one he had touched. I did not know which one contained the sedative, or poison, or whatever chemical he had found to silence me. And Evan was watching. The MC was walking to the microphone. The toast was coming. I was sitting in a trap made of crystal and light, and my son was waiting for me to take the first sip. The luxury of the Vesperline ballroom faded from my mind, replaced by the smell of burnt coffee and vinyl seats. My memory pulled me back 6 months, to a roadside diner 50 miles outside of Savannah. It was a place where no one knew the name Caldwell. That was exactly why I chose it. I had received a phone call 3 days prior from a lawyer specializing in sealed records. He told me that the adoption file from 33 years ago had been opened. The child I had given up, the secret I had buried under layers of work and ambition, was looking for me. Her name was Riley Hart. When I walked into the diner, I recognized her immediately. She did not dress like the women in my circle. She wore worn denim and a leather jacket, and a camera bag sat on the table next to her like a shield. But she had my chin. She had the same sharp, observant eyes that I saw in the mirror every morning. We did not hug. We did not cry like characters in a made-for-television movie. I sat opposite her, and for a long time, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Riley stirred her black coffee, staring at the swirling liquid. Why, she finally asked, her voice raspy. "Why did you give me up?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp as a knife. I looked at her, seeing the woman she had become without me. "I was young," I said, my voice steady but my hands trembling beneath the table. "I was forced to choose between my safety and my honor. I was alone. I signed the papers because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." I took a breath. "I have punished myself every day since," I continued. "I turned myself into a machine. I worked until I could not feel the loss. But the loss was always there." Riley looked up. Her expression was unreadable. "I do not want your money," she said quietly. "I do not want a seat at your board table. I just want to know if there is space for me to exist in your life. Just a little bit." Her request broke me in a way I had not expected. She did not want the empire. She wanted the mother. I decided to keep her a secret, not because I was ashamed of her, but because I was afraid of Evan. My son had grown up believing that my attention, my assets, and my legacy were finite resources that belonged exclusively to him. He viewed affection as a zero-sum game. If I gave any to someone else, he felt robbed. I began to make changes quietly. I met with my estate attorney to restructure my assets. I wanted to protect the company's future, not just hand it over to Evan to liquidate for his expensive hobbies. I created a scholarship fund and a grant for female entrepreneurs. I named the foundation the Helen Initiative, in honor of my late husband. Helen. It was my way of honoring the past while securing the future. But I made a fatal mistake. I underestimated the walls of my own home. One afternoon, I was on the phone with my lawyer, discussing the new trust structure. I thought I was alone in the study. We need to finalize the transfer to the new beneficiary. I had said into the receiver, I want to make sure the rights are protected before the wedding. I did not see the shadow in the hallway. I did not know that Evan was standing just outside the door, listening. He did not hear the context. He did not hear about the charity or the protection of the company. He only heard new beneficiary and transfer. In that moment, the paranoia that had always lurked in Evan's mind began to bloom. He thought I was replacing him. He thought I had found a new favorite. And tonight, as he watched me from across the room with murder in his eyes, I realized that my secret had not protected Riley. It had turned her into a target, and me into an obstacle he was ready to remove. I pieced together the fragments of Evan's betrayal later, but the logic of it was as cold and sharp as a scalpel. It started with those stolen words he overheard outside my study door. He heard the child, inheritance, and transfer, and his insecure mind filled in the blanks with his worst nightmares. He did not hear a mother trying to do right by a lost daughter. He heard a CEO preparing to fire him from his own family. He constructed a narrative where I was the villain, plotting to replace him with a secret heir. He did not confront me. That would have required courage. Instead, he investigated. He went through my files and the wedding contracts. When he found the name Riley Hart listed as the second photographer, he did not see an artist. He saw a weapon. He believed I had hired her not to take pictures, but to bring her out on stage. He imagined I would introduce her to the 300 guests, to the board members, to the investors, effectively telling the world that Evan was the second-choice child. The humiliation he imagined was so vivid, it became his reality. He needed an accomplice. So he turned to Genevieve. He played on her anxiety about the perfect wedding. Mom is unstable. He must have told her, his voice dripping with fake concern. She is planning something crazy. She could ruin everything, unless I control it. Genevieve, desperate for approval and social standing, agreed to look the other way. But Genevieve was not the only shark circling the water. Her stepfather, Victor Harrow, was involved. I knew Victor. He had been eyeing the Caldwell Meridian Group for a decade. He did not care about Evan or Genevieve. He cared about the merger. He needed Evan to be in charge so he could force a signature on the acquisition papers. They were all using each other. And I was the obstacle standing in the way of their payday. Evan's solution was chemical. He found a sedative that dissolved instantly in alcohol. It was fast-acting and potent. His plan was terrifyingly simple. He would wait for the toast. I would drink. Within minutes, my speech would slur. I would stumble. I would look like a woman who could not handle her liquor. He would rush to my side, the dutiful son. Mum has had a bit too much to drink, he would say to the room. She is just emotional today. He would guide me out of the ballroom, away from the prying eyes of the investors. And there, in the privacy of the bridal suite, while my mind was foggy and my will was broken, he would place a pen in my hand. The document was already printed. It was a temporary power of attorney, granting him full control over my assets and the company voting rights until my recovery. He had rehearsed every step. He had practiced the concerned look in the mirror. He had prepared the apology speech to the guests. But he made one critical error. He forgot that photographers see everything. Riley was not just there to fill a contract. She had been hired to capture the candid moments, the behind-the-scenes details that usually go unnoticed. She was standing in the shadows of the floral arrangement, her telephoto lens trained on the head table. She was looking for a shot of the groom's hands, Through the glass of her lens, she saw it all. She saw the small packet palmed in his hand. She saw the white powder cascade into my champagne flute. She saw the liquid fizz for a microsecond before settling back to clear gold. She saw her brother trying to poison her mother. And in that moment, the girl who was not ready to call me Mom decided she was not going to let me fall. She snapped the shutter, capturing the crime in high definition, and then she started walking toward me. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone again. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of the Vesperline ballroom. The ambient lighting shifted from a warm amber to a focused spotlight on the stage. The atmosphere changed instantly. It was no longer a party. It was a theatre production. And I knew my cue was coming. I was in the middle of a chess match, and my own son was the opponent across the board. Riley Hart materialized out of the darkness. She moved with urgency, abandoning her earlier stealth. She knelt beside my table, pretending to adjust the angle of a battery-powered floor light. It was a perfect cover. To the guests, she was just a diligent worker fixing a technical issue. She leaned in close, her face inches from my elbow. "You have 2 glasses," she whispered, her words rushing out in a breathless stream. "Do not drink. I filmed it. I have everything." She was gone before I could respond. She vanished back into the periphery, her camera raised, blending into the background. My heart slammed against my ribs. She filmed it. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. It was not just a suspicion anymore. It was evidence. I looked across the room. Evan was not looking at me. He was looking at his wrist. He checked his watch, then glanced at the stage, then back at his watch. He was counting the minutes. He needed the sedative to enter my bloodstream and peak exactly when I stood up to speak. He wanted the slur, the stumble, the confusion to happen under the spotlight. It was a timed demolition. Tessa leaned over, touching my arm. "Marianne," she said, her voice concerned. "You look stiff as a board. Come on. Let's go to the ladies' room or stretch your legs before the speeches start." Her innocent suggestion was a gift. It gave me a reason to move. "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need to fix my dress." I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the floor, but the sound was drowned out by the noise of 300 guests shifting in their seats and the clinking of silverware. I stood up. I kept my movements deliberate. I used the volume of my skirt to shield the table surface from the general view. I was the CEO of a risk management firm. I knew how to use chaos to my advantage. My eyes locked on Evan. He started to turn toward me, sensing movement. My breath hitched. If he saw me now, the plan would fail. Suddenly, Victor Harrow stepped into Evan's path. The older man grabbed Evan by the shoulder, pulling him into a tight huddle. I could see Victor's lips moving fast, his expression serious. He was likely pressing Evan about the merger, or the post-nuptial agreement, or some other clause he wanted signed before the night ended. Evan looked annoyed. He turned his back to me to answer his father-in-law. This was it. I had 7 or 8 seconds, maybe 10 if Victor was persistent. The window of opportunity was open. I looked down at the table. The 2 crystal flutes sat side by side, shimmering in the candlelight. One was safe. One was poison. I could scream. I could overturn the table. I could demand the police be called right now. But if I did that, Evan would play the victim. He would say I was drunk, crazy, a jealous mother ruining his big day. He would win the narrative. No, I needed him to lose. I needed him to destroy himself. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air of the ballroom. The fear in my chest crystallized into something harder, something colder. If you want me to fall in front of this crowd, I whispered to myself, my eyes drilling into the back of my son's head, then I am going to let you fall. I needed a distraction, and I needed it immediately. I caught the eye of a passing waiter and raised my hand with the imperious snap of a woman who was used to being obeyed. He rushed over, his face a mask of panicked service. "My napkin," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "It is damp. Replace it. Now." The waiter flustered. He reached for the linen, creating a small flurry of movement that blocked the line of sight from the head table. This was my cover. Victor Harrow was still gripping Evan by the shoulder, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. I had 5 seconds. I did not hesitate. I reached out and grabbed the stems of both champagne flutes. My hands did not shake. I had spent 30 years negotiating hostile takeovers and navigating boardroom coups. My nerves were steel. I lifted both glasses simultaneously, ostensibly to move them out of the waiter's way. "Careful." I murmured to no one. In one fluid motion, I crossed my wrists. It was a sleight of hand I had practiced absent-mindedly with pens during boring meetings. But tonight, it was a survival mechanic. The glass that had been on the left slid to the right. The glass that had been on the right slid to the left. The liquid inside barely rippled. I set them down on the white tablecloth with exact precision. I rotated the base of the right-hand glass 3 degrees clockwise to match the condensation ring on the linen. The waiter dropped a fresh napkin. "Apologies, madam," he stammered. "Fine." I dismissed him without looking up. I sat back, folding my hands in my lap. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Evan turned back to me. He shook off Victor's hand and adjusted his tuxedo jacket. His eyes immediately darted to the table. He looked at the 2 glasses. He checked the position. He saw the glass on the right, the one he intended to drink from, sitting exactly where he expected it to be. He did not know it was now the vessel carrying his own poison. I saw his shoulders drop. The tension left his jaw. He smiled, a genuine look of relief washing over his face. That was my confirmation. I had switched them correctly. The music lowered. Evan walked over to my table, picking up the glass on the right with a confident sweep of his hand. He gestured for me to take the other one. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and curled my fingers around the stem of the glass on the left. The safe glass. He turned to the room, raising his glass high. The spotlight hit him, making him look golden and perfect. "To my mother," Evan said, his voice trembling with an emotion the guests mistook for love. "She has sacrificed everything for me. Everything. And tonight, I want to thank her for finally letting go." The words were a double entendre, a cruel joke that only he and I understood. He was thanking me for dying. "To Marianne," he shouted. "To Marianne." 300 voices echoed. The sound of crystal clinking together rang out like 1,000 tiny hammers. Evan brought the glass to his lips. He did not sip. He drank deep, swallowing a large mouthful in his eagerness to seal the deal. I brought my glass to my mouth, but kept my lips pressed tight, letting the liquid merely touch my skin. He lowered his empty glass, beaming at me. I lowered mine, staring back into his eyes. "Now," I thought, the words echoing in the silence of my mind. Wait for your performance to begin. The first 10 minutes were the hardest to endure because absolutely nothing happened. Evan sat at the head table, radiating the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he had just committed the perfect crime. He held Genevieve's hand tightly, resting it on the white tablecloth. She smiled at him, completely unaware that she was holding onto a grenade with the pin already pulled. Evan kept glancing at me, waiting for my eyelids to droop or my speech to slur. I met his gaze with a steady, unblinking stare. I sipped my water. He sipped his champagne. The clock was ticking, but he did not know it was counting down for him. Then the signs began to appear. It started with his eyes. Evan began to blink rapidly, as if the contact lenses he did not wear were suddenly irritating him. He would close his eyes for a second too long and open them with a slight start, as if he had momentarily forgotten where he was. He tried to cover it up. He reached for his water glass with a bit too much force, the ice cubes clattering loudly against the crystal. He laughed at a joke from his best man, but the laugh was too loud and arrived half a beat too late. It was a hollow, booming sound that made a few guests at the nearby tables turn their heads. Victor Harrow, ever the opportunist, did not notice the medical distress. He only saw a delay in his business deal. He leaned over Genevieve, whispering something into Evan's ear. I could read the body language clearly. He was asking about the power of attorney papers again. He wanted the signature before the cake was cut. Usually, Evan would have been deferential to his father-in-law. He would have charmed him. But the drug was stripping away his social filters. Evan snapped his head toward Victor. Back. Off. Victor. Evan growled, his voice slurring slightly but carrying enough venom to make Genevieve flinch. I said, I would handle it. Stop. Pushing me. Genevieve pulled her hand away, looking at her new husband with genuine confusion. She had never seen him look at her father with such raw irritation. Beside me, Tessa leaned in, her brow furrowed. Marianne, she whispered. Is Evan all right? He looks sweaty. Is he ill? I took a slow sip of my wine, savouring the cold liquid. He is fine. Tessa, I replied, my voice calm and low. He is simply receiving exactly what he prepared for tonight. I looked for Riley. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was moving along the perimeter of the dance floor, her lens fixed on the head table. She was not taking portrait shots. She was documenting the disintegration. Click. She captured Evan rubbing his temples. Click. She captured Genevieve's worried expression. Click. She captured Victor's annoyance. Riley was building a forensic timeline of the evening. She was gathering ammunition. The master of ceremonies returned to the stage, his voice booming with forced enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, before we cut the cake, the groom would like to say a few words. Applause broke out. It was polite, rhythmic applause. Evan stood up. He rose too fast. His knees buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the table to steady himself. The silverware rattled violently. A few guests chuckled, thinking the groom had simply enjoyed too much celebratory champagne. Evan smiled, but it was a lopsided, disconnected grimace. He waved a hand dismissively and stepped away from the table. He walked toward the stage. His gait was uneven. He placed his feet carefully, as if the floor were tilting beneath him. When he stepped up onto the platform, he tripped on the top step, catching himself on the microphone stand. A loud screech of feedback tore through the speakers. The audience laughed again, louder this time. They thought it was a comedy routine. I did not laugh. I watched his eyes as the stage lights hit his face. His pupils were blown wide, two black discs swallowing the blue irises. They looked cold and diluted. He looked like a man who was drifting away from the shore, the rope to reality already severed. He gripped the microphone stand with both hands, his knuckles white, trying to anchor himself. I realized then that the danger was peaking. The sedative Evan had chosen was not just putting him to sleep. It was disinhibiting him. It was peeling away the layers of calculation and control he had built up over 32 years. He was not just going to pass out. He was going to talk. And the more he tried to sound like the dutiful son, the more the drug would force the ugly, unfiltered truth to the surface. Evan gripped the microphone stand as if it were the mast of a ship in a hurricane. The spotlight washed out his features, turning his face into a pale, sweating mask. He started with the script. He thanked the guests for coming. He thanked the caterers. He thanked the band. His voice was thick, like he was speaking with a mouth full of cotton. But for a moment, it seemed like he might pull it off. Then the drug sheared through the last of his executive function. He stopped mid-sentence. He swayed, his eyes rolling back slightly before snapping forward to find me in the darkness of the ballroom. The polite smile slid off his face like melting wax. Family is... Evan started, his voice cracking. Family is supposed to be the people who don't betray you. Right. The question hung in the air, heavy and toxic. A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd, but they died instantly when Evan pointed a shaking finger directly at my table. But you... He slurred, leaning into the mic so his breath popped against the diaphragm. You have someone else, don't you? Mom. 300 people went dead silent. The waiters froze with trays of champagne mid-air. The band stopped playing. It was the kind of silence that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Evan was not making a toast. He was making an accusation. Genevieve shot up from her chair. Her face was white with panic. She reached for his arm, trying to pull him away from the stand. Evan? Honey, she hissed, audible only to the front row. Sit down. You are not well. Evan whipped around. He shoved her away with a violence that shocked the room. His hand hit the microphone, sending a thunderous boom through the speakers. Get off! He screamed, his voice distorted and raw. Get off me, I am talking to her. Genevieve stumbled back, catching herself on the edge of the bridal table. The crowd gasped. The veneer of the perfect wedding dissolved instantly. Evan turned back to me, his eyes wild and unfocused. He began to babble, the secrets he had guarded so carefully spilling out in an incoherent torrent. The hidden child. He mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. I saw the trust. I saw the papers. Mum, you think I am... Stupid, you want to replace me, you have to sign. Sign the papers tonight. Right now. He tried to step off the platform to come toward me, but his legs had turned to rubber. He lunged forward, losing his balance completely. His arms flailed, searching for support. His hand slammed onto the table displaying the wedding cake. It was a 6-tier structure, a masterpiece of fondant and sugar flowers that had cost $5,000. It was not built to hold the weight of a grown man. The table tipped. Evan went down hard. It was not a graceful swoon. It was a heavy, ugly collapse. He dragged the tablecloth with him. The cake slid off, crashing onto the parquet floor in an explosion of white icing and sponge. The champagne tower next to it followed, shattering into 1,000 jagged shards. The sound was deafening. glass breaking, metal clashing, and the collective scream of 300 guests. Evan lay amidst the ruin of his own wedding, covered in frosting and broken glass. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs would not obey. The microphone stand had fallen with him, and the mic lay inches from his face. It was still live. It was still transmitting. The room was chaotic, but the speakers were crystal clear. Every person in the ballroom heard the wet, ragged breath he took. "Why aren't you—" "Sleeping?" Evan groaned, his voice echoing from every corner of the ceiling. I put it in your glass. Mum, why are you awake?" The chaos froze. The confession hung there, undeniable and recorded. I sat perfectly still. Around me, the guests were no longer just watching. They were reaching into their pockets. A forest of smartphones rose into the air. Flashes fired. Video recording lights blinked like red eyes in the dark. They were capturing the wreckage. They were capturing the confession. The paramedics were already pushing through the doors, summoned by the staff. But it was too late for Evan. The video was already uploading. His reputation shattered faster than the champagne flutes on the floor. He had wanted to destroy me in front of the elite of Savannah. Instead, he had just toasted to his own destruction. The emergency medical technicians rushed through the double doors, their neon vests slicing through the sea of black tuxedos and evening gowns. They descended on the wreckage of the cake table where Evan lay, checking his vitals with practiced urgency. The room was a vacuum of stunned silence, broken only by the crackle of their radios. From the shadows near the bandstand, Riley Hart stepped into the circle of light. She did not look like a hired vendor anymore. She looked like a prosecutor. She held a small black memory card high in the air, pinching it between her thumb and forefinger like a bullet casing found at a crime scene. "I have the footage," Riley announced, her voice cutting through the air. She did not shout, yet everyone heard her. I filmed the exact moment he put the powder in her glass. "It is all here?" Genevieve stood frozen, her white dress stained with frosting and champagne splashes. She looked at Riley, then down at Evan writhing on the floor, and finally at me. The realization washed over her face. This was not a story about a difficult mother-in-law ruining a wedding. This was a criminal conspiracy. Victor Harrow reacted first. He lunged forward, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "Security." Victor bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at Riley. "Get this. Paparazzi trash out of here. She is trespassing." Riley did not flinch. She did not even blink. "My contract is with the bride, Mr. Harrow," she shot back, her tone icy. "And this file has a timestamp. It matches the toxicology report the paramedics are about to get. You cannot bury this." I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress and walked toward Riley. The crowd parted for me. I stood next to the photographer, shoulder to shoulder. I looked at the 300 faces staring back at us. "She is not trash," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a block. "Riley is my daughter." The sound that escaped the room was not a gasp. It was a collective physical shock. The scandal had just doubled in size. I saw the partners of my firm exchanging looks. I saw the socialites covering their mouths. Evan thought I was replacing him. I continued, addressing the room with brutal clarity. He was wrong. Riley is not in my will to take his money. I added her to the trust with one specific condition. She receives nothing for herself. Her only role is to function as a moral safeguard, to ensure the Caldwell Meridian Group is never manipulated by greed. She is the conscience my son lost. Genevieve turned slowly to face Victor. Her hands were trembling. The puzzle pieces of the last few months finally clicked into place. The rush to set the wedding date, the pressure to sign the merger documents, the way Victor had huddled with Evan all night. "You knew?" Genevieve whispered, horror filling her eyes. "Victor, did you know about this?" Victor clamped his mouth shut, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. His silence was a confession louder than any scream. I looked down at my son. The paramedics were lifting him onto a stretcher. The fight had left him. He looked small and broken. "My son chose to turn his wedding into a public trial," I said, my voice final. "So I am giving him a verdict by telling the truth." The EMTs began to wheel the gurney toward the exit. As they passed me, Evan opened his eyes. They were wet and unfocused, swimming with the drugs and the devastation he had caused. He reached a hand out, grasping at the air near my skirt. "I was just afraid," he mumbled, his words slurring into a pathetic whim. "Afraid of being replaced." I watched the doors close behind him. The irony was bitter. His fear of being replaced was the very thing that had turned him into a stranger, leaving his position in my life completely vacant. The silence that followed the fading sirens of the ambulance was heavy. The air in the ballroom felt charged with static. The guests were stunned, hovering between the desire to flee the scandal and the morbid curiosity to see how it ended. I walked to the center of the dance floor and signaled the sound technician. "Please," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing against the high ceilings. "Give me 2 minutes. Since you have all heard the confession, you deserve to hear the rest." I tapped the screen of my phone. I had synced it to the audio system moments before Evan collapsed. I pressed play. Riley had sent me the file 10 minutes ago, a recording captured by a remote microphone she had planted near the bridal suite earlier that day. Evan's voice filled the room, clear and conspiratorial. "She will be out of it by 9. Evan said on the recording. "The sedative is fast." Then came Victor Harrow's voice, deep and demanding. "Get the signature. Evan. Once we have the power of attorney, the merger happens tonight. Do not let her leave the room until she signs." The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. This was not just a drunk rant from a stressed groom. It was a premeditated corporate coup. I stopped the recording and looked directly at Victor Harrow. He was sweating through his expensive tuxedo, his face pale. "Here is the irony. Victor," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "The document Evan was so desperate to make me sign, it has been worthless for 72 hours. I paused, letting the words sink in. 3 days ago, I transferred the controlling interest of the Caldwell Meridian Group into a stewardship trust, I explained, watching Victor's eyes widen in horror. It is governed by an independent council. No single signature can sell it, especially not a signature obtained under duress. You were trying to steal an empty vault. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stepped out from the side entrance. He had been waiting for my signal all evening. He walked straight to Victor and handed him a thick manila envelope. The video evidence and this recording will be submitted to the police immediately. Mr. Sterling announced to the room. Mr. Harrow, this is a formal notice regarding attempted corporate fraud and conspiracy. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The Harrows were no longer the predators. They were the defendants. Genevieve looked down at her hand. The 5-carat diamond ring shimmered under the chandeliers. She slowly pulled it off her finger. She walked over to the ruins of the cake table, where the frosting and glass lay in a heap. She placed the ring on a shard of a broken plate. It made a sharp, clinking sound. She turned to her stepfather, then looked at the empty space where her husband had been. "I married a man," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I did not marry. A business plan." She gathered her skirt and walked out of the ballroom. Her bridesmaids followed her. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea, watching the bride leave her own wedding alone. The room began to empty. The show was over. I turned to Riley. She was packing her camera gear into her black bag, her movements efficient and quiet. I walked over to her. I looked at the daughter I had abandoned 3 decades ago. The daughter who had just saved my life and my legacy. "Riley," I said, my voice soft. "I did not deserve to be saved by you, but you saved me anyway." Why Riley stopped zipping her bag. She looked up at me. Her eyes were dry and fierce. "Because," she said, pausing to take a breath, "because I did not want to become him." Her words hit me harder than the betrayal. She had not done it for love. She had not done it for money. She had done it to prove to herself that she was not like Evan. She had broken the cycle. It was a moment of true healing, stripped of all sentimentality. I nodded, accepting her answer. It was enough. I walked over to a nearby table and picked up a glass of water. I raised it to the few remaining staff members and the empty chairs. "To the truth," I whispered to the empty room. "The only thing that cannot be spiked." I set the glass down. I walked out of the Vesperline Hotel with Riley by my side, stepping into the cool Savannah night. Evan would wake up in a hospital bed to face the consequences of his own ambition. But for the first time in 30 years, I was walking toward the future without looking over my shoulder. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Today, are you listening while driving, cooking, or maybe just relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.